Our program is about to begin. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones. We have a full house tonight, so if there is an open seat next to you, please fill in.
Welcome, everyone, to the Aspen Institute. I'm Crystal Logan, Vice President of Community Programs and Engagement, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this very special event. Tonight's evening is part of the McCloskey Speaker Series, and so special thanks to Tom and Bonnie McCloskey. Thanks to our Aspen Society donors and our community donors who help us produce our year-round programs here in Aspen and beyond. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We are honored to have Barbara McQuade as our featured speaker this evening. She is a former U.S. attorney appointed to that role by President Barack Obama. She is professor from practice at the University of Michigan Law School, where she teaches criminal law, national security, and data privacy. And she's the best-selling author of Attack from Within, which is available for purchase in the lobby, and she'll also be signing books after the event. So please join us for that. Please join me in welcoming Barbara McQuade. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I am so happy to be here. I've had a chance to be at the Aspen Institute before and was just thrilled with the opportunity to come back and talk with you. Thank you to Crystal. Thank you to Katie Carlson for your work to invite me and host me here. It's really a great honor. You know, you would think the fact that I've been here before would have alerted me to the fact that the background is royal blue, the exact same color as the jacket I chose to wear tonight. So I'm aware that I probably look to you like some sort of floating head. To make it easy for you, I will try to move around a little bit and wave my arms and let you know where I am, that I'm over here now, so that you can follow along. So, you know, follow the bouncing head. I'm really honored to speak with you tonight about this book and the ideas in it. And that's what the Aspen Institute is all about, I think, which is the sharing of ideas, engagement, setting aside any predisposed notions we have, any biases we have, and really engaging with new ideas and thinking about them. So I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes, and then I look forward to answering any questions that any of you might have. So this book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America, it is my thesis that disinformation is harming our democracy, and unless we do something about it, our democracy is in peril. It's a harm to our voting rights, to our national security, and to public safety and the rule of law. I'll talk a little more about those things. Let me also say, I don't care about your politics. If you are left of Karl Marx or right of Attila the Hun, you are all good with me. Because this book is not about politics, about policy choices. It's about how we make those decisions. And we have to make those decisions based on facts. I think it was Daniel Patrick Moynihan who was the first to say, though many others have said it, that we're all entitled to our own opinion, but we have to agree on the same facts. We can't really achieve anything as a country unless we start from the same baseline of basic facts. And yet, what we see are people who are willing to bend facts to advance their agenda. And so that is what concerns me. That is what I worry about. I think that disinformation has been with us since the dawn of time. You know, Sun Tzu, I'll move over here. I'm over here now. Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese warrior, wrote about all war is deception. It's been around for a long time, but I think what is making the problem so acute at this moment are two things. One is technology, which allows people to send messages to anyone in the world under false names and cause influence without our even realizing that we've been nudged by someone. And the other is our deeply polarized politics, which has grown ever more polarized, I think, in the last 30 years, and especially so, I think, in the past 10 years or so. Let me mention why I wanted to write this book. As you heard, I teach national security law at the University of Michigan Law School, but I spent most of my career as a national security prosecutor. So we worked on counter-espionage cases, we worked on cases against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Russian cyber threats, and the threat has really evolved to the point that until recently, the Department of Homeland Security said that the greatest threat to the homeland was disinformation. So this idea of information warfare is something I've been thinking about for a long time. I've been studying it and teaching it, and what I wanted to do with this book was to write a book that is accessible to ordinary people so that we can recognize the tactics of disinformation in hopes of building resilience against it so that we can avoid being manipulated by it and take back our democracy so that we can control the facts and then make policy choices as we are able to persuade each other. Let me start by defining some terms. The term disinformation and misinformation. A lot of people use those terms interchangeably. I'm over here, by the way. No. A lot of people use those terms interchangeably, disinformation and misinformation. That may be perfectly accurate, but in my book, I actually discuss those two things as different things, and in my view, they are very different things. Disinformation comes from the world of counter-espionage. It is the deliberate use of false information or sometimes sprinkled with accurate information in an effort to advance some sort of agenda, political agenda, personal agenda, career agenda, and also to evoke an emotional response. There's something called active measures. I'm going to plant this seed out there, and I'm going to get a rise out of you, and that is what I want. I want you to take the bait and fight back. So right now, just for example, we are seeing Donald Trump push this idea of nationalizing the police department in Washington, D.C. In my view, that is a type of active measure. Now, certainly crime is a problem in Washington, D.C., as it is in other major cities. However, we're at a 30-year low. But by ramping up this idea that there's an emergency here and we have to take drastic steps to respond to it, I think he is counting on opponents of this idea to respond back and to get angry and to say, this is government overreach. And for members of the public to say, I guess it's the president who wants to control violent crime, and I guess it's his opponents, the Democrats, who favor violent crime or are soft on violent crime. Right? It is designed to evoke this emotional response, designed to get my opponent to take the bait, to create this emergency and this idea and to sow discord in society. So that is disinformation. And we've seen it from Russia, we've seen it from China, and now I think we are seeing it from members of our own political community. And I use an example of Donald Trump, but certainly disinformation is an equal opportunity weapon. Stop the Steal may have been something pushed out by Trump and the MAGA movement. Last year, I think we saw Democrats push the false narrative that Joe Biden had the mental acuity for another 4 years. And I think know now, based on all that we saw from that debate, and even in the aftermath, when people continued to defend his ability to serve as president, that was false. So disinformation, false claims to advance some sort of political narrative. And then there is misinformation, which is a little different. Sometimes my children refer to me as misinformation. Hilarious. But misinformation is kind of its unwitting cousin. When somebody hears a false claim and they believe it, and then they repeat it, thereby advancing the false claim. And so disinformers count on people to be misinformed and to amplify that message. Russia refers to those people as useful idiots. They believe the claim and they repeat the claim, and through that repetition, people begin to believe that claim. So that's misinformation. I'll give you an example of misinformation when I myself fell for some misinformation. Hard to believe, I know, but even I fell for some misinformation. I read something on social media that said Patrick Mahomes, the NFL quarterback, had made an announcement that he would not play another down for the Kansas City Chiefs until they changed their name to something that was not offensive to Native Americans. All right, way to go, Patrick Mahomes. You know, this is a big star. He makes big bucks for playing football. To sit out games will cost him millions of dollars, but he was doing it to take a stand. I thought that was terrific. And so, I had to retweet that immediately because I had to share that message with the world. Well, later that day, I was talking with some family members, and I said, "Did you guys see that story about Patrick Mahomes?" And they said, "No, what story?" I said, "Come on, you must have heard the story. It's got to be all over the news. Sitting out, not playing another down, Kansas City Chiefs." And they're looking at me with no recognition that this has happened. And at that point, one of them said to me, "Not only have I not heard that, it sounds kind of fake." And I said, now that I say it out loud, it sounds kind of fake to me too. But it must be true because I read it on social media. So I went back and I found it. It was on my feed, and it was posted by what looked to me like a legitimate outlet, ESPN, right? The worldwide leader in sports, from their Sports Center brand. That's their, big sports highlight show. And so then I looked a little more carefully, and I realized it didn't say Sports Center. It actually said Sprots Center. So somebody had purposely created what looked at a quick glance like ESPN Sports Center, legit outlet, and was pushing this claim. So I quickly took it down, but I realized I had been duped by disinformation, and I had become a misinformer and spread it out. And in response to my retweet, there were all kinds of responses back and forth, right? "You woke such and such. How dare you say that?" And then, of course, on the other side of that is, "I think it's great to stand up for these Native American tribes." And so there was all this debate back and forth. So why did I believe it and post it? I think I kind of wanted it to be true. And so in some ways, it got that emotional response, got me to repeat it. But what it did is it stoked one of those divisions in society, right? This idea of political correctness, of renaming, of changing history, of changing tradition versus protecting individual rights, respecting Native American tribes. And so it hit all the buttons. So that is an example of misinformation. I want to talk to you now about some of the tactics of disinformation, because once you know some of these tactics, you can spot them a mile away. You watch a debate or something, or you watch a political speech, a campaign rally, and you start to see some of these same kinds of themes over and over again. So one of them is declinism, this idea that society has gone downhill. Things used to be great, but now things are awful. Violent crime is way, way up, which might be a falsehood. But there's certainly enough violent crime that it feels like violent crime is a problem. Or the economy is tanking, things are terrible, inflation is awful. All of these things to make people feel like we need desperate change. I don't want to equate any of today's modern leaders with Adolf Hitler, but Hitler wrote the playbook. Mein Kampf is the playbook. And in Mein Kampf, Hitler writes about a number of these things. And one of them is this idea of declinism. You got to make people feel bad, like the society has gone downhill. Our country is in terrible shambles, because that is what it takes to have a bold new leader to we're in emergencies. We got to change things. And so this idea of declinism for Hitler in Germany, they were coming off of World War I, so people were feeling hurt, sense of pride. They had lost land in the war. The economy was poor, and so it was easy to push this theme of declinism. But we hear the same thing today about how terrible things are, whether it's violent crime or immigrants. Certainly we have our problems, but those who try to seize power will focus on some of those negative things to get us amped up and eager for the kind of bold, drastic change that a leader wants to take. The other great thing about declinism is you have to blame somebody for what's going on here. Enter the scapegoat. And that gives us a chance to blame some segment of society for all of our woes. Certainly in Hitler's Germany, that was Jewish people became the scourge of society. They're the reason our economy is so bad. They're getting rich off of our backs and stoking a hatred for a particular group in society. You know, there's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Is that the phrase? I don't know who your rooting interests here in beautiful Aspen. Maybe everything is so tranquil, you don't have to worry about rooting interests. But where I come from, at the University of Michigan, we root for Michigan, and oh, how we hate Ohio State. But it unites. Oh, we got some Michigan people out there? Go Blue! All right, go. No offense to our friends from Columbus. But it unites us. We get fired up in our hatred for Ohio State. We love it. We say, who are your two favorite teams? Michigan and whoever's playing Ohio State. We get fired up. So in the same way, when we have scapegoats in society, it can be a uniting force. We hate them. So for Hitler's Germany, it was Jewish people. Today, fill in the blank. It may be immigrants. It may be the LGBTQ community. Lately, it seems like it's the transgender community. But we will unite in our hatred or our fear of these people we can label as other, and we will be united, so united that when these people are mistreated, we don't object, we cheer them on. And I think that's something that we're seeing today with immigration. Do we have immigration problems? You bet we do. But instead of really looking to solve the problems, to create legal immigration pathways, we are instead demonizing immigrants. I saw something recently referring to some of the current laws as the Juan Crow laws, right? Not Jim Crow, but Juan Crow, which is sort of interesting. That is the scapegoat of society today. But it helps a leader seize political power by uniting people against a group of other that we can claim as other. And then I'll just mention one more, and that is this idea of repetition. The more often I can say something, the more likely you will be to believe it. And we only need to look toward advertising to realize this is true, right? Nike, just do it. Got milk? Coke, it's the real thing. These images stay with us. It's why they advertise, because the more you hear it, repetition, 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 the more recognizable it is, the more we believe it. The same is true with disinformation. Stop the steal, right? There's a woman named Sarah Longwell who is a Republican who does focus groups, and she surveyed a number of Republicans after the 2020 election, and these were people who believed that the election had been stolen. And the most common reason people cited as to why they believed it is, well, so many people are talking about it. I mean, how could it not be true if I see it on television, I see it on social media, and my friends and my neighbors talk about it? It must be true, right? All of these useful idiots spreading a false narrative, but the more we hear it, the more we believe it to be true. All right, so those are some tactics. I have some more in the book, but let's move on, because I also want to talk about how technology is really exacerbating this problem of disinformation. So technology, it's a great thing, right? It is what allows us to connect with people all over the world. I mean, I love the internet. My husband often jokes that, hang on a minute, I have to finish the internet, because there's so much interesting stuff to read on there. So it's a wonderful thing, but along with, like every other invention in the history of the world, with every invention that brings great benefits, it can also bring some hazards. The Wright brothers, perhaps, invented the airplane. Somebody invented the airplane. It's a great thing, right? Air travel. We flew here from Michigan. What an amazing convenience to be among you in these beautiful mountains in a matter of a couple of hours. But to invent the airplane is also to invent the plane crash. And so along with all of these great innovations come problems. We want to try to minimize those problems, but they exist. And I think we have ignored for too long many of the problems that we have created through the internet, one of them being social media. So one of the things I teach in my class is Robert Mueller's report from 2018 about Russia's efforts to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. And this is not about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. This is about Russia. This is about what Russia did to us, to America. And that is what is written in this report. And one of the things that he and his team concluded is that Russia conducted an influence campaign during that election season to achieve 3 goals. One was to sow discord in American society. And how did they do that? They chose every fault line they could find. Abortion rights, immigration, gun rights, affirmative action. You name the hot button issue, and they stoked division on both sides of those issues. And they did it by creating false personas, pretending to be ordinary Americans, spouting outrageous views on both sides of every issue. And so you were to read it, I don't know what it is, like gun lovers hate children, right? Something outrageous like that. And so the gun people come back and say, you're the bad person because we need guns to save children. And so before you know it, you've got all these people arguing back and forth. And it was all started by some guy in a hoodie in St. Petersburg, Russia. So sowing discord in American society was one of their objectives. Another objective was to undermine public confidence in democratic elections. Democracy not so hot in Putin's Russia. And so trying to push narratives about how elections are stolen, there's cheating in elections, there are dead people who vote in elections, there are non-citizens who vote in elections. That gets pushed on social media so that people begin to believe through repetition that democracy and our elections are not free and fair and accurate. And then the third one was to advance the interests of Donald Trump, their preferred candidate, over Hillary Clinton, not because they particularly liked Donald Trump, but because they believed that his America First agenda would clear the world stage for Putin to destabilize NATO and take over parts of, restore some of the former Soviet republics. So those were the objectives. And some of these accounts are in his report. They had names like Blacktivist and Army of Jesus, United Muslims of America, Tennessee GOP, Heart of Texas, all across the political spectrum, but they looked like real ordinary people. And beginning many months before the election, they would post very ordinary things. So Blacktivist appeared to be a black political activist, posting all kinds of things that sounded smart and reasonable and the kinds of things a black political activist might post. But then as the election neared, started saying things like, Hillary Clinton has never done anything for our community. We should send her a message by staying home on election day. Now, do we know that anybody actually heeded that? No. The conclusion of Robert Mueller and the Senate Intelligence Committee is no known switching of votes in the election, but did that have a nudge effect? Did that have an influence on the outcome of the election? Same with Army of Jesus. There was a meme of Jesus and the devil arm wrestling, and the devil saying, if Hillary wins, I win, or something like that. So, again, I don't know that people believe that literally, but it suggests other Christians are opposed to Hillary Clinton. Maybe that sends me a nudge in a certain way. Or people who are agnostic or atheists look at that and say, look at those foolish people who believe that, the devil is involved in this election in some way. So that was the state of play in 2016. Here we are now, almost 10 years later, and the technology has advanced to the point that disinformation has become even more problematic. What we saw then was social media posts, people had to like it and share it, and it had an influence. It reached millions of Americans. But now we are seeing artificial intelligence able to generate deep fake videos, audios, images in a way that is incredibly deceiving. We talked about seeing this on the left and the right. There have been all kinds of deep fake photos of Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein and underage girls all over the internet. Totally made up. We have seen in the last election fake robocalls sounding like the voice of Joe Biden. His voice is out there sufficient to feed into a large language model to be able to replicate his voice. And he urged people, voters in the New Hampshire primary, to stay home from the polls on election day. He said, That's exactly what Donald Trump wants you to do. You should stay home and save your vote for the general election, which actually doesn't make any sense anyway, right? Because you can vote in the general election. But that was, perhaps generated by some Russian group who didn't understand how that works. There was also a fake video that went viral, including posted by Elon Musk during the election season, of Kamala Harris with real scenes of her on the campaign trail at rallies and shaking hands and kissing babies and all the things politicians do. But it had a voiceover, again, sounded exactly like her voice, saying things she did not say. It said things like, I'm the ultimate DEI candidate because I'm both black and a woman. So if you don't vote for me, you're racist or sexist or both. And so that made the rounds on social media, as if she had been caught saying those things on a hot mic, when in fact she had said no such thing. Recently, we have seen China really escalate its presence in this space by creating large language models and grabbing information about all of us from social media to be able to create profiles of all of us and use it for very targeted advertising or messaging that they believe will resonate with us, utilizing the technology of artificial intelligence. So the technology is only getting better, and yet we stand here with no regulation whatsoever of social media or artificial intelligence. I mentioned that the two things that I thought made disinformation so acute today were technology, which I just discussed, but the other is our deep polarization. And I think this is a very serious problem in American society today. It is why Congress is so unable to get much done that can actually advance the interests of our country, because they'd rather fight with each other than actually resolve anything, because they want to score political points and win the race and stay in office. And so the deep polarization, we've got deep red, deep blue, it makes it very difficult. Some of this is a result of the better data that pollsters have, where they have learned that people, it works. The dirt works. This idea of divide and conquer, us versus them, red versus blue, Republican versus conservative, to demonize your opponent actually ramps up voter turnout among your base. Now, it turns off moderate voters who say, I can't, they call them double haters. I can't stand either one of these candidates because all they do is negative campaign against each other. I just want to hear ideas. I don't want to hear all of this other stuff. And yet, what the pollsters would say is, you're talking about staying home from the election because you hate both sides? That's just fine. I don't care. Because you might vote for the other guy. You're a swing voter. I don't need you. In fact, I don't want you. What I really want is to make sure my base is fired up and shows up at the polls. And so it has become a campaign strategy to be so deeply polarized. But I think that is what causes us to identify now so strongly with our political tribe. In the same way we've got Michigan and Ohio State, we've got Republicans and Democrats. I sometimes worry when I see some of my students in how they reach their own opinions about various issues. When I was in college, I kind of thought, I think one thing about affirmative action. I might think another thing about reproductive rights. I might think yet another thing about U.S. military intervention, right? Whatever it was, I was thinking issue by issue. Instead, what I seem to be seeing today among my students is they pick a team, and then they are just party line down the line on every issue, right? Like guns, capital punishment, abortion are all aligned, depending on which party you are, in identical fashion. It's a group think, lack of critical individual thinking that I think is harming our society. So the harms, I'll just give you a quick summary of some of the things I'm worried about. Harms to our democracy. We talked about people thinking that elections are no longer free and fair. And this idea that if I tell you elections aren't free and fair, you're going to become concerned that elections aren't free and fair. And now I can utilize that concern and skepticism to motivate changes in the law. And so we're seeing changes in the law in a number of states, making it more difficult to vote. And it's because politicians say, we want to stop all the fraud. There's not really any measurable fraud occurring in our elections. And yet we see laws being passed to make it more difficult to vote. Difficult for whom? The poor, minorities, the transient students, people who are likely to vote for one party over another. So I think our democracy is being harmed. I think just the loss of faith in our democracy is a harm. I also mentioned that there's a harm, I think, to our national security in the disinformation that we are seeing that is spewed around. Since World War II, it has been the foreign policy of the United States to lift up democracies around the world. It was always the State Department's belief that other democracies were good for America. Because if you have more democracies around the world, there are fewer wars, there are fewer famines, there are fewer refugee crises for us to deal with. And yet now we are seeing democratic backsliding around the world for many of the same reasons we are seeing it here. And in fact, our democratic backsliding is contributing to democratic backsliding around the world. After 9/11, those awful images of the people attacking the US Capitol were beamed around the world and were exploited by our hostile foreign adversaries. In Russia, there was an official who said, "Look at this, American democracy is limping on both feet." In China, President Xi said, "This just demonstrates why democracy does not work. After all, what you really want is prosperity, not democracy. And a single strong leader can deliver prosperity much better than a democracy can, because you can see from this attack on the Capitol that democracy has failed." Of course, in China, they lock up anybody who disagrees with the leader. If you're a protester or a journalist, you will go to jail for those kinds of things. So I'm not ready to abandon democracy just yet. So that's the harm to our national security. But also, I worry about the harm to the rule of law and public safety and how those things are intertwined. The rule of law is just this idea that we are all accountable under the law. We all have to obey the law, and if anybody violates the law, there will be consequences, and we should all be treated fairly and similarly along those lines. What we are seeing now, I think, is because people have been fed disinformation, have become dissatisfied with the way our justice system works. Traditionally, we've agreed that despite all of our differences of opinion, we resolve those differences at the ballot box or in courts of law. But now we are seeing vigilantes engage in violence, to use brute force to get the objective they want, because they are told that judges are lunatics or left-wing Marxists, that they ought to be impeached when they decide in a way against a leader. We've seen a whole lot of decisions by courts since January of blocking some of the more aggressive executive orders issued by President Trump. And there have been a whole cascade of social media posts saying that judges are exceeding their power by telling a president what he can do. Civics lesson. That's exactly what courts are supposed to do, right? To rein in the executive when they overreach beyond their constitutional powers. And so as a result of that, this stoking of dissatisfaction, courts aren't going to do it for us. Politicians aren't going to do it for us. I have to take the law into my own hands. And I think that is what is sparking some of the violence, political violence we're seeing in society. This shooting that occurred in Minnesota with lawmakers, the hammer attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, looking for her. There have been shootings motivated by fear of the great replacement theory. People tell you they are going to replace us, meaning black and brown people or Jewish people, right? This has been a trope throughout history, will replace white Christian Americans. And so that motivated the mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket. A white supremacist went into a black neighborhood in a supermarket to shoot as many black people as he could find. It motivated a shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, someone who was trying to take out as many immigrants as he could. And it motivated a shooting at the synagogue, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, by somebody who thought Jewish people were going to replace us. And so when we stoke that kind of dissatisfaction with democracy, with the way our elections work, with the way our courts work, it is an understandable consequence that people are going to be inclined to take the law into their own hands. I think that is what happened on January 6, 2021, when people were so angry that an election had been stolen that they showed up and tried to prevent the results from being certified through violence. That is the antithesis of democracy. So disinformation is causing a lot of problems. I've painted a very bleak picture for you, but there are solutions, and they're solutions we can absolutely achieve. My gosh, think about all the ingenuity we have come up with in this country. We put a man on the moon. We found a vaccine for COVID. We can do all kinds of things, and yet we have yet to been able to find a solution to disinformation. And I think there are a lot of things that we can do. Let me name just a few of them. I'll approach it from both the supply side and the demand side. So from the supply side, this is the social media companies that are the platforms that are hosting all of this disinformation. I think we could use a little bit of regulation. Not censorship, not regulation on content, but regulation. Currently, social media companies operate under immunity from civil liability from a law known as Section 230 of the Telecommunications Decency Act of 1996. And in 1996, it probably made good sense, right? Let's see what this internet thing is all about anyway. And so it said, if you're an internet service provider, we want to encourage you to innovate and attract investors. So if somebody posts something on your platform that's untrue or that defames somebody or causes a problem, you, the platform, are not liable for that. You're just providing the soapbox. And so the people who are posting, they might be liable if they say something improper or illegal or defamatory. But you, the platforms, you're going to be good because we want to encourage you to get into this kind of work. And we don't want you to be fearful of a lawsuit that might chase you down because you happen to post something that later turned out to be incorrect. Probably makes a lot of sense in 1996. But here we are almost 30 years later. The failure to evolve with the law as technology has evolved, I think is very problematic. We don't have any regulations. And so it's a little like raising a baby alligator in your bathtub. It's adorable when it's still a little baby, right? But at some point it grows into a man-eating predator. And I think that's where we are today with social media. And we need to do something different about the way we regulate social media. No longer can we just let it run and see what happens. We know what happens. And so I think that there can be some common sense regulations that could help address this problem. The tech industry has pushed very hard with Congress. They've made massive donations, not only to the president, but to members of Congress, to keep regulation at bay. They do not want regulation because regulation is hard. It means you got to follow rules. It might mean there are penalties if you fail. And so they have pushed very hard against it. But, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the airplane, think about that. We want to maximize air travel and minimize plane crashes. So how do you do it? You regulate it. We have the FAA. And they have lots of rules about building of the plane and flying of the plane and the training of the crew and how much rest they need and the air traffic controllers. It's a highly regulated environment. And yet when it comes to social media, anything goes. Say whatever you want. It's all cool. I would propose that we do something. In fact, in my book, one of the sources I cited was the Aspen Institute, which worked on addressing disinformation. One of their ideas, which I think is a great one, is to take away the immunity, not for everything that social media does, but for the things they do themselves. So if other people are posting stuff that turns out to be untrue later, you know, that you go after the poster. But for things that the social media platform itself is doing, like designing algorithms that can manipulate us. There was a Facebook data scientist who became a whistleblower, and she testified before Congress that it wasn't so much the content at Facebook that concerned her, it was the algorithms. Algorithms, of course, are just computer code that tell a program what to do. But what she said is that Facebook deliberately programmed the algorithm to generate outrage, because it turned out, based on their data, that the more outraged we were, the longer we stayed online. And the longer we stayed online, the more they could charge for their advertisers. So outrage equaled money for Facebook. So how did they do it? Do you remember there used to be a time, I'm sure there's some Facebook users out there, there was a time when it was all chronological based on what your friends posted. Like, oh, there's my sister at that wedding yesterday, and there's my friend at her high school reunion last week, right? That was the stuff that was posted. They introduced something called the news feed. Here's stuff just for you. And how did they know what you would like? Because they're collecting all this data about you. And so they're sending out information that they think is going to outrage you. And as a result, you stay online, but it makes us outraged. And so why can't we have some oversight over those algorithms? In the same way we oversee planes and their building and their plans, in the same way I used to serve on the board of a bank, we had to answer to all kinds of regulators about making sure there were sufficient deposits for withdrawals, that we weren't engaging in money laundering, that we weren't discriminating against borrowers. Lots of different regulators involved there. What if we were to have the Federal Trade Commission or some other agency review those algorithms to make sure they were not being used to manipulate us? Another thing that I think we could do to remove that immunity is the way social media companies take and use our private data against us. They take that private data and they shoot it back with targeted ads for products and political campaigns. These days, I am getting an awful lot of ads to buy a Detroit Tigers baseball cap. I'd buy one too, but I already have like 12. I am a big Tigers fan, and how do they know that? Because I post stuff about the Tigers all the time. They are finding things about you, using those things, but using it against you to target you with an ad that's going to resonate. In the fall, the Washington Post discovered targeted ads from the same group going to people who, based on their social media use, appeared to be pro-Israel in the war in Gaza, and people who appeared to be pro-Palestinian in the war. And depending on which group you were, you got a different ad. One that said Kamala Harris is bad for Jewish people, another that said Kamala Harris is bad for Palestinians. It was almost identical, but it was designed to reach different target audiences to push your buttons because they knew so much about you. All right, well, those are some things from the supply side. How about the demand side? That's us. That's where we come in. Well, I think there are a number of things we could do. One is I think we should introduce media literacy in our schools. This has been done in Finland, where based on their proximity to Russia, they are bombarded by false claims from Russia. They teach kids how to read with a skeptical eye, ask good questions so that you can build resilience against disinformation. I think we should bolster our civics education. It has really taken a back seat in our era of STEM education. STEM is great. I think we should be teaching kids STEM, but not at the expense of civics education. Because if you don't understand how the three branches of government work, then when you read one of these outrageous posts about judges encroaching on the president's power, you might fall for it because you don't know any better. So increasing civics education. And then I think all of us ought to take responsibility for our own education. There are programs offered at universities, libraries, and other places to improve our own media literacy. I'll give you a quick crash course right now, more in the book, but let me tell you a couple of things that all of us can do to be better consumers of information. One is, don't get your media all from the same source. Right? How many of us have friends or relatives who say, yeah, my dad watches Fox News all the time, all day, every day. That's fine, but introduce something else into your diet, right? A healthy diet has a little protein, some vegetables in there, maybe also a few carbs. You got to have a balanced diet. So, I do commentary for MSNBC. I think what they report is accurate, but they no doubt have editorial discretion where they're choosing what to report on. And so they may report about the Epstein scandal and not report as much about what's happening on our southern border in immigration cases. So to have a good mixed diet, you need to read and listen and watch to a number of media sources. That's important. Make sure the sources are credible, right? I think the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CNN, BBC, I think those are all credible sources. What's not credible is when you go online and read something posted by someone with a name like Patriot Girl 1776, right? You should be very skeptical of things posted by just like someone who's, just a guy or just a woman. Like those are not good people. When you read an article, who are they relying on to give you this information? Did they cite an expert in their field? That could be useful. Did they cite data? Did they cite a study? That can be useful. If there is a study, did they include the sample size? Was it 2,000 subjects in this study, or was it 2? Because that can make a big difference. And the last one that I think is so important these days is headlines. Headlines bear very little resemblance to the story they accompany. Have you noticed this? I had a friend who's a reporter at the Detroit Free Press, and she took me around and she showed me they have a big board where they rank all the clicks on the stories. And so they are motivated by clicks. And so as a result, they want you to click on that story. A lot of times that means you're going to have to watch an ad, right, to be able to read the story. And they want you to, because that's how they generate revenue. You know, I don't begrudge them, they're revenue generating. But these headlines often barely resemble the story. Here's my favorite one recently. You all know who Caitlin Clark is. She's this basketball star, used to be at Iowa, now she's in the WNBA. And the headline said, "Behind the Caitlin Clark media meltdown." And I thought, oh no, Caitlin Clark must have melted down. You know, she's under so much pressure. She's new to the league. She gets roughed up a lot. She must have had a little tantrum. Beyond the Caitlin Clark media meltdown. So I clicked and I read the story. And if you would think it was about Caitlin Clark having a temper tantrum, you would be forgiven, but you would be wrong. Because what the story was actually about was a reporter who went after her, and he had the tirade using profanity against her. She sat there very calmly and answered his questions. So the Caitlin Clark media meltdown was about a reporter who was a member of the media who was at this press conference. So beware of that. The last thing I would mention and ask you to do is that we all have the power to influence people with facts and with truth. Even when truth goes against our own political goals and values, we have to honor truth over convenience or truth over our political tribe, right? That's what matters most. And so people are most influenced by those we know in our sphere, our family, our friends, our neighbors. And so all of us can be ambassadors for truth by getting out there, talking with respect, talking with compassion, but insisting on truth over tribe. I'll end there and look forward to answering your questions. We have some roving microphones around the room. I see a hand down here. The roaming microphone is on its way, sir.
Excellent.
There you go.
Okay. Barbara, thank you very much. That was very interesting. It seems to me that one of the reasons that disinformation can take hold as easily as it seems to is that the purveyors of that include some element of truth. You know, anti-Semitism on college campuses. Yeah, I'm sure there is some. Not to the extent that it's been used as a way of getting. How do you sort through, you know, it's 10% true and 90% not true, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, such a good question. So the question is, isn't it true that oftentimes disinformation has some accurate information embedded within it? And so it makes it very difficult to distill it. And the example of on college campuses, I think that's a perfect example. So what we are seeing, right, is this effort to accuse Harvard and Columbia and other universities of engaging in anti-Semitism. Certainly, there are people on those campuses who've been victims of anti-Semitism, no doubt. I am sure there's also been anti-Muslim rhetoric hurled at people on those campuses. There are people who are protesting the war in Gaza. There were certainly Jewish students who are protesting the war in Gaza. And so I think that if you are a person who cares about anti-Semitism, you don't want to be too quick to say, no, that's a lie, that's not true, that's not important. It is. It's all true. It is all important. But is it more important than taking away free speech rights or penalizing universities, extorting them, frankly, and using it as a guise for getting them to bow down and capitulate which is what I think is going on. But you see it in so many things. The Washington, D.C. Violent crime problem. Sure, there's a problem with violent crime. Even though violent crime rates are down, it's still a significant problem. And anybody who denies that is not going to be taken seriously. And so you use that and exploit that truth for some other advantage. I think same thing with immigration. Do we have an immigration problem? Yes. Should we be enforcing our immigration laws? Yes. But again, using that to justify unlawful procedures. I mean, we're seeing invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, which is supposed to be used only in times of a military invasion from a foreign government. Talk of suspending the writ of habeas corpus. And so it's this whole idea of the ends justify the means, that there is some truth to this problem, but does that mean all laws are off and we get to use whatever means we want to solve this problem? So I think that's a really important part of the nuance here. And I think one of the other things about disinformation with this us versus them idea is that we lose appreciation for nuance. Nuance is very important. Anti-Semitism is an issue, but we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time and think about that along with other issues about academic freedom. So thank you for a great question. I see another hand here. Oh, and we don't want to miss out on our friends in the back there either.
Press a button or anything? No. Thank you. This was wonderful. I would like to hear your, just off the top of your head, opinions on several Supreme Court decisions recently. I'll be specific in a minute. Oh, wait. First on the disinformation and the cure with the internet. What do you think of the idea of holding the purveyors, as distinguished from necessarily every little guy, your theory, to the same standard as New York Times versus Sullivan? Mm-hmm. The purveyor becomes the editor. That's one. But the other opinions I'd love to hear you opine on sorry, my brain isn't working.
It's okay. Supreme Court opinions?
Yes, the Supreme Court opinions of unlimited campaign contributions, which I think has done so much to pollute things, and the presidential power decision. There were about 6 more, but that's good enough.
Yeah, no, we could be here all night, so I don't want to be here all night. So let me say a couple things. First, you asked about holding purveyors of disinformation who post false things online to the same standard of New York Times versus Sullivan, which is, of course, kind of the landmark case on defamation, that if you act with actual malice, you can be civilly liable. I think that is the standard, and I think it's a good standard. The problem is you often can't find who the purveyor was. Actually holding I see what you're saying. So holding Facebook or Meta responsible. I think what they would say, it's a valid argument. I think what they would say is there are so many billions of statements that are made on our platforms every day that if we had to police those things, we would go out of business. But I think it's a valid argument. On to the Supreme Court opinions, though. You asked about the immunity decision, presidential immunity, and what was the other one? Oh, Citizens United, campaign contributions. Yeah, I talk about this in the book too. Campaign contributions, I think, is one of the things that is really harmful to our democracy. And part of it is it is tied to disinformation in this way. It really opened the floodgates to dark money and super PACs who do not need to identify their donors. So you have all these ads, you might see these ads on TV, paid for by the grandmothers for a red, white, and blue America. You're like, oh, that sounds lovely. And it turns out it's like, the NRA, or it's a gun lobby. It's something like that. So we don't get to see that. So there is some deception and disinformation. But the case of Citizens United, and it wasn't in a vacuum. It's actually built on a case from the 1970s called Buckley versus Vallejo. And what they say is that campaign expenditures are a form of free political speech. And I think they really went off the rails in the 1970s with that decision. Because what it does is it takes away the idea of one person, one vote. Because if you have enough money, there is no limit on how much you can expend. And of course, Citizens United extended that to corporations and gave them that First Amendment right, and labor unions and other organizations. So basically took that right. It is illegal under the First Amendment to put any limits on campaign expenditures as long as you don't coordinate with the candidate. Well, I mean, you don't need to coordinate with the candidate to know what issues are going to advance their campaign. But, if you think about the idea that one person, one vote, we should all have equal representation at the ballot box. Now, if you can spend 10 or $100 million saturating the airwaves, you can really have outsized influence on it. So I think it's terrible for democracy. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. The makeup of this Supreme Court has not changed since that case was decided in, I think, 2010. So I don't think we're going to see it overturned anytime soon. But Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire has proposed a constitutional amendment to say, okay, we love the First Amendment, but you can restrict campaign expenditures. I like that one. Presidential immunity. That is another opinion that was shocking to me when it came out. You almost want to say, did anybody tell Gerald Ford? Because it probably could have made a difference in his presidency. For that matter, did anybody tell Richard Nixon, right, who resigned over this stuff? They thought that you could be charged with a crime for that. Everybody did. How about all the president's men who went to prison, right? John Dean and G. Gordon Liddy and all these guys. Like, you mean I took the fall and he was immune all along? I think this is a very new understanding of what was in the Constitution long ago. Now, what they have said, how do we deal with it? I think one of the things we have not yet seen shake out is how that gets applied to situations. Because you may recall, even after that decision came out, Jack Smith, the special counsel, went back to a grand jury and he got a new superseding indictment to remove one portion of it, the portion where the president directed the Department of Justice to support him in that the election was stolen when there was no support for that. But all the other stuff, they said, was outside the scope of his duties as president. They were not official duties as president. I mean, it's still problematic that, as the dissenters said, the president could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his rivals and would be immune. He could accept a bribe for an appointment to the Supreme Court and he would be immune. As Justice Sotomayor said, immune, immune, immune. Shocking. So it's not a great decision in my book, but I'm not sure in practice it might turn out to be as bad as it appears. And then let me mention just one more, which is the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. Again, 50-year-long precedent. In fact, I think Amy Coney Barrett said at her confirmation hearings, it was such a solid precedent, it was a super precedent because it had been cited and reaffirmed so many times. And yet they reversed it. And what I will say about that I found so offensive is that, sometimes cases are overturned. Plessy versus Ferguson got overturned in Brown versus Board of Education. But there are certain factors the court looks to in deciding whether to overturn precedent. Ordinarily, precedent is good. It gives us fair notice about what the law says. Justice Louis Brandeis once said, better that the law be settled than that the law be settled correctly, so that we can have notice. We all know what the rules of engagement are, and we can go about our business. So there are 4 things courts look to when they're deciding whether to overturn a precedent. One of those is, had the facts and the law changed since we decided this case, right? We decided that a long time ago. Do we have a new understanding of facts and law? That could be one thing. Another is, has the law grown up around this case in a way that's really inconsistent with that case that we decided long ago? Has the rule proved unworkable in practice? It seemed like a good idea, but now that we've seen it in practice, turns out it was a bad idea and it doesn't really work. And finally, have people relied on this rule in their ordinary lives? By every one of those measures, Roe versus Wade should not have been overturned. None of those factors were true, and they don't even talk about them. What they say instead is, Roe versus Wade was egregiously decided then, and it's egregiously wrong now, and we therefore overturn it. And I will tell you the difference between the current makeup of the court, which I think is all too willing to write on a clean slate as opposed to respecting precedent, than its predecessors. I can remember when I was a newish prosecutor and William Rehnquist was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. No bleeding heart liberal, right? He is a staunch conservative Chief Justice. He writes the opinion in a case called Dickerson. And this case was working its way up the system, and it was going to overturn Miranda v. Arizona. You all know the Miranda one. You watch the cop shows, right? You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. That was in Miranda. It's not written anywhere in the Constitution. What they said back then was it was a prophylactic rule to make sure people understood their rights, because if you didn't read them their rights, you'd have educated people who knew them and less educated people who didn't, and you'd have this unfairness. So they kind of, they kind of made it up, but they wrote it and thought it was, a good policy. And so everybody thought, oh man, they took up this case, Dickerson. They are going to overturn Miranda v. Arizona. And what happened was they did not. They reaffirmed it. And what Justice Rehnquist wrote was, were I writing on a clean slate, I would abandon this rule because it is nowhere in the text of the Constitution. But if look at those tests, has it been workable in practice? You bet it has. It works pretty well. Do people rely on it? Yes, they do. Do we have a new understanding of the facts and the law? No. Is it inconsistent with the law? No. In fact, it's become one of these super precedents. Therefore, we decline to overturn it, and we reaffirm Miranda today. That is what the system is supposed to do and what I would have expected justices of integrity to have done in the Dobbs case. Well, how about we head to the back of the room? If you've got anybody back there, we probably have time for one or two more questions. Maybe one more. Crystal's giving me the one more question signal.
Do you have a thermometer for truth when you're reading or learning? And what I mean by that, I'm sure you already understand. We don't oftentimes know anything about what we might be reading. Space travel. Are there certain things that make you raise your eyebrows that you then do further investigation? Or how do you know when you want to see if something is really true?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Do I have a truth monitor? I don't know that I have a truth monitor, but I can recommend some things to you. If you read something that is very surprising to you or unusual to you, I think it is useful to look for a second source. There are also some excellent fact-checking websites out there that I will often look to. There's one called Snopes.com. There's factcheck.org, politifact.com, and something called Ground News that will rate news outlets on the basis of accuracy and political bias. And so if I'm reading something that seems just too outlandish to be true or inconsistent with something I know to be true, that's when I think I look to some of those kinds of things. Well, I see that we are out of time, but I want to say thank you again, and I'd be happy to meet you outside and sign your books. Thank you so much.